He left a Bible on the bench, and something hidden inside it. I didn't see his face at first, just the cotter dark wool thing too fine for this neighborhood, and the way his hand trembled when he set the book down like it weighed more than stone. He looked both ways, like he was crossing the street nobody else could see, then walked into the rain and didn't look back. The Bible stayed. I don't read much these days. Words used to come easy. Now they arrive like snow quiet, cold, hiding everything you thought you knew. But a book left alone in the weather is a kind of emergency. Even out here, something in me knew that. Maybe it was the way the bench under the bridge didn't belong to anyone, and yet belonged to all of us. The wanderers, the hungry, the ones who talk to the wind when it's the only voice that answers. Maybe it was the way the book waited, patient as a promise. The rain came down in thin needles, stitching the street to the river. Above me, cars moved in slow-lit lines, red and white and indifferent. Chicago has 1,000 places to get lost, and only a handful where you're allowed to be found. The underside of a bridge is both. I nudged the fire closer with a stick and watched the steam rise off the concrete. The Bible hadn't been there 10 minutes before my breath started fogging around it like a halo. I told myself I'd leave it. A man should be allowed to forget something without the world picking through it like a crow. But the longer it sat, the more wrong it felt, like a child waiting for a parent who had already decided not to come back. The cover was black, plain, edged in gold that had seen better Sundays. No name on the front, no ribbon peeking out. Just the memory of thumbs that had pressed it open and a faint oil of a life now smudged into leather. "I'm not your librarian," I said to it, which is the kind of sentence you only hear under bridges. Then I picked it up anyway. It was warm, somehow like the man had left a little of himself inside. The water had freckled it but hadn't sunk through. It put it down under the iron lip of the bench where the drops broke and slid off in. Strings, thoughtful, careful, like hiding something in plain sight. I carried it back to the fire and sat with it in my lap. The city coughed in the distance. A train screamed far off, losing itself between warehouses and the flat river light. I looked down at my hands. The lines cut deeper than any verse, and I ran a thumb along the spine. There were tiny cuts on the leather, thin as eyelids. I'd seen Bibles like this in hospital rooms and courtrooms, and once at a wedding where the groom's tie looked like a borrowed apology. A book that shows up wherever people are out of places to run. I heard footsteps, quick and nervous, on the path above. A woman in a green coat glanced over the railing, saw me at the fire and the shape of the book in my lap, and looked away like she'd been caught peeking through a keyhole. That's the thing about people. They're afraid of seeing their reflection in the dark parts, so they pretend the dark is empty. It isn't. I opened the Bible. It didn't fight me. It came apart at a place that had been asked to hold 2 long psalms, somewhere past the middle. The pages were thin enough to see the ghosts of the lines behind the lines. The kind of paper that sounds like moth wings when you turn it. The first thing I noticed was a smell not church, not incense, not the sweet dust of old bookrooms. Citrus, sharp and clean. I frowned. Then I saw a whisper-thin rectangle folded between the pages, taped there with clear strips as narrow as scars. People think we don't know what things are out here. We do, we just don't get to keep them. It was a key card. Hotel Styler. Smooth white badge with a faint grey stripe that caught the firelight like a river at night. No logo, no number. Just a tiny dot of blue marker in one corner. Next to it on the page, a verse was underlined in pencil, the line pressing hard enough to dent the paper beneath. Psalm 139. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there. The pencil had torn the paper where hell was. I wondered how hard a man has to press to make scripture bleed. I closed the book, not fast, not slow, and felt the card inside breathe against the pages, a secret with a pulse. The rain softened to a hush, and the city's hum fell into that space I've come to trust, the gap between sounds where truth sometimes puts its head down to rest. I looked out at the river, at the slick road, at the place where the man had gone. The coat, the trembling hand, the way he'd kept turning his head like he was listening for footsteps that didn't belong to him. I've told you before out here, names are dangerous, but stories are worse. They stick to you. They borrow your mouth and sleep in your lungs. Still, I whispered to the book like it could hear me. "All right," I said. "Let's see who you belong to." A pair of pigeons hopped closer, grey as old questions. I brushed them away with my boot and slid the Bible under my coat. I don't own much blanket, cup. The same lighter that never lights until it does, but I've learned to carry what asks to be carried. The key card dug into my ribs like a small truth that refused to sit quiet. By the time night opened its full throat, the bench had gone back to being just a bench. The man didn't return. The river kept doing what rivers do, forgetting everything that falls into them. I fed the fire the last of my dry wood and watched the smoke thread itself through the gaps in the bridge. There's a kind of prayer that has no words, and it sounds like that. Around 10, Benny wandered in from Holstead, pushing his squeaky cart full of cans and stubborn hope. He saw the outline of the book against my coat and whistled low. "You turned preacher on me, Walt." "Wrong flock," I said. Benny eased himself down, Bones arguing the whole way, and warmed his hands. "Heard shouting up top," he said. "Couple hours ago. Car doors, sirens, like the city remembered it was alive." "Which way?" I asked. He pointed in the direction the man had gone. "East. Fancy shoes kind of neighborhood. Not for the likes of us." I wanted to ask him what he'd seen, what he'd heard, whether he believed in coincidences or only in the kind of math you can do with scars. Instead, I poured him half my coffee, thin and bitter as regret, and he drank it like grace. We didn't talk about the book. Some things get smaller if you say them out loud. When he left, the quiet felt bigger than it had any right to be. I took the Bible back out and held it near the fire, not close enough to hurt it. I found the underlined verse again. I found others' job, a mark beside. I was not in safety, neither had I rest, neither was I quiet. Yet trouble came. The pencil had a way of leaning hard on the last words, like the hand that held it was trying to make the paper remember. Between Isaiah and Matthew, 2 pages were carefully glued together along the inner margin, a seam so neat I'd have missed it if the fire hadn't thrown a quick, bright blink. I worked a fingernail under the edge and felt the brittle kiss of old adhesive. Someone had hidden something there, someone careful, someone who believed in books like vaults. I didn't pry it open. Not then. There are locks, and then there are promises wearing lock costumes. Instead, I put the book away and listened to the bridge settle as the temperature fell. Steel contracts like a heart after bad news. Somewhere, a bottle broke. Somewhere else, a laugh that didn't sound like happiness tried to pretend it was. The river kept talking to itself in a language only stones learn. I slept badly. Dreams of coats and trembling hands and hotel door locks that open into rooms with no furniture, just a bed made up too tightly to lie down in. Around 3, a siren wept itself past and woke me for good. I got up, added the last stick to what was left of the fire, and watched it surrender. Ashes, memory's way of admitting it tried. Morning dragged its grey knuckles across the water. The first train limped the horizon. I wrapped the book in a plastic bag I'd saved for nothing in particular and set out. The bench stared at me as I passed it, all splinters and patience. A man alone in a dark coat walked by on the street above, headed down, hands hidden. It wasn't him. The walk was wrong, too sure, too fast. The man last night had moved like he was pulling a rope only he could feel. There's a church a few blocks from the bridge, red brick and cracked steps, the kind that's always either closing or being saved by bake sales. I went there because some places are good at holding pressure, and I had a pocket full of it. The door was open. Inside smelled like wet wool and old music. A woman with a mop looked up, saw me, and saw through me. "Service is Sundays," she said. "I'm just here to sit," I said. She nodded at the last pew, the one that wobbled. I took it. I didn't take the book out. I just put my hand over it, where it slept under my coat, like a father on a stroller, like a cop on a holster. Like anyone who knows the world reaches for what it wants, with both hands. A man came in suit, kind smile that didn't reach his eyes. He lit a candle. He whispered to it. Then he left, the smile falling off him like a price tag he'd forgotten to peel. I recognized the smell as he passed, the same citrus that had been on the pages. Clean, expensive, a note of something trying too hard to be innocent. I waited until the mop woman wasn't looking. I slid the book out. In the quiet, the pages seemed louder. I turned to the glued seam again and listened to my better angels lose a vote. I eased the paper apart. It gave, slowly, like skin letting go of a bandage. Inside was a flash drive, small, black, with a silver loop, the kind that disappears in a pocket and reappears in courtrooms. There was also a photograph, thin as a breath, tucked behind the drive. 4 people at a long table, white tablecloth, rain of crystal, a city's view behind them, turned to jewelry by distance. The man in the dark coat sat second from the left, eyes on the camera like he was daring it to blink first. His hand covered a woman's thumb on her pulse. The other 2 men smiled with the mouths of people who'd practiced. In the lower right corner, in ink as neat as a surgeon's, a date. Last week. I turned the photo over. 2 words. I'm sorry. I don't trust apologies that arrive without witnesses. But the key card, the flash drive, the glued seam, the pressed slams, the citrus on a man who leaves a Bible under a bridge and walks east, put together, they made a shape. And the shape looked like trouble. When I slid the drive back into its paper pocket, the church door opened hard enough to cough the old hinges awake. 2 men stepped in. Not parishioners, not lost. Coats that fit too well. Shoes that had never met a puddle without suing it afterward. They didn't look at the cross. They looked at the shadows, at the corners where things learn to hide. One of them had the kind of jaw that makes bad decisions sound like orders. The mop woman straightened. "We're closed," she said. "We won't be long," the jaw said. His voice had money's patience. He scanned the pews and saw me in the last row, just a coat, a beard, a man-shaped quiet. He looked at the space around me like it owed him rent. I slid the book under the bench, slow enough to be invisible, fast enough to matter. Then I stood, the way a man stands who's about to leave and has nothing to take with him. "Morning," I said. They nodded at the word, but not at me. The jaw cut an eye toward the last row, toward the wobbling pew, toward the dust pattern that didn't quite match where a book might have been. The other one drifted down the aisle like a coin, deciding where to land. He smelled like the same citrus, only louder. "You from around here?" he asked me. "I'm from under the bridge," I said. He smiled without teeth. "That's what I meant." I moved past them. The door was a friend pretending to be a stranger. My hand found the handle. The mop woman's mop squeaked, the sound of a small thing announcing its courage. "Leave a candle," the jaw said, like a suggestion that wasn't for a lost friend. "I don't have money," I said. He looked at my pockets like they were a punchline. "Everyone pays," he said, "one way or another." Outside, the day had brightened into a shade of grey. Only Chicago noticed about its limits. I waited by the steps until a bus went by, coughing heat and impatience. Then I slipped around the side, lifted the loose basement window I knew from other winters, and eased back in when their attention drifted toward the map of donation boxes near the altar. I'm not proud of the things I've learned to do. I'm just alive because I learned them. The book lay under the last pew where I'd left it, small as a beating heart in a big chest. I slid it into my coat, slipped out the front, while they argued with the mop woman about what a locked door was supposed to mean, and didn't breathe until the church had shrunk behind me into brick and history. Back under the bridge, the fire remembered me with a thin crackle. I set the Bible down in the circle of warmth and stared at it until the verses started to look like streets on a map. The flash drive waited in its paper bed. The key card sat between Job and Isaiah, like a tooth someone had forgotten to bury. The photo's date tapped time against my head. "If I make my bed in hell," I said, the words tasting like old iron, "behold, thou art there." I don't know about God, but I know about hell. It has good real estate in this city. I slid the drive into the hollow of my palm and closed my fingers around it. I could feel the corners, the small sharpness, the way hard truth always has edges. The card would open a door somewhere. The drive would open a room inside someone's life, where they kept the thing that could kill them. I fed the fire, more for company than heat, and the flames stepped closer like a dog that trusts you now. I listened. The bridge settled. The pigeons traded gossip. Somewhere up atop, a siren considered the neighborhood and decided to keep moving. Night came back with its coat unbuttoned, and that's when the man in the dark wool finally returned. He didn't come all the way down. He stood on the path above, right where the railing rusts into lace, and he looked at me the way a diver looks at water he knows is cold enough to stop his heart. His hands were empty. "I think you have something of mine," he said. His voice was quiet and expansive and tired. The kind of tired you only earn by doing things you can't confess without changing your name. I didn't stand. I didn't move. The Bible sat between us like a choice. "What did you leave inside it?" I asked. He looked past me, at the river, at the city, pretending it was asleep. When he answered, it was soft enough that the fire had to lean in to hear. "A way out," he said. "Or a way in. Depends on who's asking." Above us, a car rolled by, and the headlights stuttered across the underside of the bridge like someone striking matches in a cave. He flinched at the light the way guilty men do. Then he took the first step down. "That book doesn't belong to you," he said. I looked at the drive in my hand, at the card sleeping between torn profits, at the photograph whispering last week like a threat. "No," I said. "It belongs to the bench." His jaw worked, and something mean and scared crossed his face and left before it could be identified. "Please," he said, "before they get here." "Who's there?" He glanced east, the fancy shoe direction, then back at me. The answer was in his eyes, the same way storms live in the horizon before their weather. He took another step, and another. By the time he reached the edge of my firelight, I could smell the citrus. I could see the tremble in his hand. He looked at the Bible. He looked at me. "Some doors," he said, "you only open once." And then the night above us, filled with the sound of tires stopping where tires shouldn't, and the darkness just outside the circle of the fire, learned new shapes that didn't belong to pigeons or mercy. I closed my fist around the drive. The verse about hell glowed in the wind, and the city held its breath. The city's breath thickened with rain again. The kind that doesn't fall, just hangs there. Wet air, slow and deliberate, covering every surface with a thin memory of water. Above us, tires hissed against the slick asphalt, the echo bouncing down between the bridge's ribs. The man stayed in the half-light, where the fire's reach dissolved into fog. I could see the outline of his coat, his hands, one empty, the other hidden. "Sit down," I said, and shifted enough to make space near the flames. He didn't. His eyes moved to the river, where a sheet of reflection trembled with each ripple of wind. "You read it," he said. It wasn't a question. "I read what was meant to be found," I told him. The rain hissed as it touched the fire. He stepped closer, just enough that I could see the small twitch in his jaw. "Then you know what's at stake." "No," I said. "I only know it's heavy. Whatever it is, it weighs enough to make a man hide behind scripture." He laughed once, short, nervous. "That's not scripture," he said. "It's insurance." He crouched near the edge of the light, coat collar turned up like a barrier. The shadows made his face look carved, sharp where life had been soft. "You'll need to give it back." "I don't owe you," I said. "Maybe not. But if you keep it, you'll owe someone worse." He glanced behind him, toward the road above, and flinched when headlights passed. "They're watching," he said. "They've been watching since before you picked up that Bible." "Who are they?" He rubbed his temples, water dripping from his fingers. "The ones who built the bridge and forgot what was under it." That kind of answer tells you more than a name ever could. He looked older now, the fire showing lines I hadn't noticed before. His hands were shaking, not from cold, but from what happens when you start running and forget how to stop. "What's on the drive?" I asked. He hesitated. His mouth opened, then shut. The answer came out half-whispered, like something that could still change shape if you spoke it wrong. "Everything." "That's not an answer. It's all of it. Names, dates, numbers, accounts that don't exist but do. Things that buy silence." "Whose silence?" He looked straight at me. "Everyone's." The fire popped, throwing a brief spark between us. The sound startled him more than it should have. He looked up toward the city again, as if expecting to see red and blue crawling across the concrete sky. "I didn't take it," he said quickly. "It was given to me. I thought I was helping." "Helping who?" He hesitated again, then said, "A woman." That stopped me. His eyes flicked toward mine, and then away, the way guilt does when it's checking to see if it's been recognized. "She said she worked for them, the foundation, the one that builds all those shelters and hospitals. The one with the golden dove on the doors. You've seen the signs." I had. They sponsored soup drives every winter and smiled for photographs beside hungry men like me. Their billboards said things like "Hope is a home." "What about her?" I asked. "She said people were dying. Not from cold, from treatment. Wrong drugs, fake vaccines, names of the dead used to fund new projects. She had proof. She gave me the drive. Said to hide it somewhere they'd never look. Somewhere holy." He pointed toward the Bible. "That's what you were doing," I said. He nodded. "She told me to leave it here. Said this bridge has stories. Said people like you still tell the truth." The rain had thickened, each drop breaking like tiny confessions against the ground. "She trusted me," he said quietly, "and I failed." The words cracked, thin but heavy, and I saw it then, not just fear, but something deeper, loss with no place to go. "What happened to her?" He didn't answer. I knew that silence. I'd seen it in too many faces. The kind that belongs to someone who walked away from an ending they can't unsee. He stood up again, stepping back into the dark. "They'll come," he said. "For both of us. Burn it. Forget me. Forget her." I reached into my coat, pulled the drive out, held it between two fingers so it caught the light. "Why not burn it yourself?" He smiled without warmth. "Because it's the only thing still telling the truth about what I've done." Another car passed above, slower this time. The sound of the engine changed, deeper, heavier, and his eyes darted toward it. He turned, like he meant to run, but stopped when he saw the look on my face. "You said they're watching. How close are they?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The sound of boots on wet pavement said enough. "Give it to me," he whispered. "Please, no." The fire bent low, wind pushing its breath sideways. The bridge began to hum, that long, low vibration steel makes when weight finds it. 3 silhouettes appeared on the slope above, men in coats, not uniforms, moving like they'd done this before. One carried something small in his hand, and it caught the light like a question nobody wanted answered. The man in front of me froze. Then he looked at me with the same expression people wear when they realize the story isn't going to let them go. "I told you they'd come," he said. "Who are they?" He started backing away, eyes flicking between me and the shapes above. "Burn it," he said again, his voice cracking. "Don't let them find it." One of the men above shouted his name, not loudly, but with the certainty of someone who owned it. He flinched like he'd been shot. Then he turned and ran. The men came down the hill fast, boots slipping in the mud, but not stopping. The first reached the edge of the firelight, gun drawn, eyes scanning the shadows. I moved back, slow, both hands raised. "He went that way," I said. The man didn't even look at me. "Where's the book?" I said nothing. The fire cracked between us, spitting a spark that landed near his shoe. He kicked it out without blinking. "Look under the bench," the second man said. They spread out. Their movements were precise, silent, except for the wet slap of their shoes. They'd done this before. The third man stayed near me, hand in his coat pocket, the bulge of metal making conversation unnecessary. Above us, I heard the sound of someone stumbling, the man in the coat slipping on the wet stone. A shout followed, then a single gunshot that echoed off the bridge's steel ribs. None of the men near me moved. I just listened. The rain filled the silence that followed. "Go check," said the one with the gun. One man went up. The others watched me. I watched the fire. It's strange, the way moments stretch when you're close to the edge of something you didn't choose. Time becomes elastic, pulling and trembling, holding you in its hands. The man with the gun finally spoke. "You saw nothing tonight." I nodded. "Say it," he said. "I saw nothing tonight." He nodded back, satisfied, and turned to leave. But before he did, he leaned close enough that I could smell that same citrus under his coat. "If anyone asks about a Bible, tell them you don't read." Then they climbed back up the slope, silent as the rain. I waited until the sound of their steps had blended with the river's voice. Then I reached into my coat and felt the flash drive still there, dry and warm against my chest. I sat down again, staring at the fire. The reflection of its light danced on the wet pages of the Bible. I thought about the man who left it, the woman who'd trusted him, and the line that kept coming back to me from Psalms, "If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there." I didn't know if she'd made her bed there, or if I just had. When the fire finally dimmed, I took the drive and pressed it into the Bible between those same pages, right over the verse. Then I closed it tight. The bridge exhaled, a sound like tired metal and old prayers, and the night kept its secrets. The next morning came slow, as if the sun itself was tired of showing up for this city. The air was thick with the hangover of rain, and everything looked bruised. Buildings, sky, even the river. When you've lived outside long enough, you start noticing how the world wears the same kind of exhaustion people do. It forgets to shine. It just endures. I hadn't moved all night. The Bible sat in my lap, heavy, as if the pages had absorbed more than water. I kept thinking about the man's last look before the darkness swallowed him. and the sound of that single gunshot still hung around me like leftover smoke. Sometimes I wonder if it echoes for the dead or for the living who didn't help in time. By mid-morning, the city above had already erased what happened. Cars passed, horns complained, and someone somewhere was baking bread good enough to make the wind smell like forgiveness. But not here, not under this bridge. The concrete doesn't forget so easily. I took the Bible, brushed off the ash, and slid it into my coat. Then I walked toward the riverbank, where the morning light caught pieces of glass and made them look like something worth keeping. Every step felt heavier than the last. That's the thing about carrying other people's secrets. You start mistaking them for your own. The streets were waking up slow, hungover from whatever sins the night had left behind. A bus hissed to a stop a few blocks away, doors sighing open. People stepped out, coats, umbrellas, tired faces that had places to be. I walked among them, invisible in plain sight. No one notices the man who looks like he belongs nowhere. That's a kind of power, if you use it right. The church wasn't far. Same red brick, same cracked steps. But today, it looked smaller, as if the truth hidden inside had begun to rot its walls from within. I hesitated at the door. Part of me wanted to leave the book there again, let the story bury itself in silence. But silence, I've learnt, is rarely the same thing as peace. Inside, the air smelled of candle smoke and floor polish. The mop woman wasn't there, but a priest I hadn't seen before stood near the altar, his back turned. He was younger than most, maybe 40. Hair neat, black shirt crisp and pressed like someone who still believed in order. When he heard the door creak, he turned and gave me that look people give when they're trying to decide whether to bless you or chase you out. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Maybe," I said, setting the Bible on the nearest pew. "I think this belongs to someone who won't be needing it anymore." He glanced down at it, and for a moment I saw something flicker behind his calm recognition, maybe. He reached for it slowly, then stopped midway. "Where did you get this?" "Found it under the bridge," I said. "Someone left it behind." He studied me. "You opened it?" It wasn't a question, and I didn't bother lying. I did. His eyes went to the cover again, then to the small watermarks across the leather. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "There are things you shouldn't carry, my son." "I carry what the city leaves me," I said. "Sometimes it leaves Bibles." It exhaled, the way people do when they're trying to breathe out a secret. Then he gestured toward the confessional booth near the back. "Come," he said quietly. "If you're telling the truth, you might want to sit." I followed. Not because I trust priests, but because I wanted him to hear how much he already knew. We sat opposite each other, the thin screen between us. The church felt too still, the kind of quiet that sounds like listening. "What's on it?" I asked. He didn't answer at first. Instead, he whispered something that might have been a pastoral warning. Then he said, "The foundation. You've heard of it, who hasn't? They call it charity. I call it laundering with nicer handwriting." He paused, the sound of his hand brushing against the wood of the confessional. "They funneled millions through ghost programs, clinics that don't exist, shelters that never open. They use the faces of the dead to collect money meant for the living. That drive." He stopped, as if measuring the danger of the next words. "That drive contains every name that makes it possible, and the man who left it. He was one of them, or used to be, until he tried to stop it." The rain outside started again, pattering against the stained glass like restless fingers. I leaned forward, and the woman, the one who gave it to him. The priest went quiet. Then he said, "She was here too, a few nights ago." "Mara," I said before I could stop myself. The air between us shifted. "You knew her?" he asked. "I met her once." He nodded slowly. "She confessed to me before she disappeared. Said she'd stolen something she couldn't keep. Said she saw what happens when people try to build heaven out of other people's pain. She's dead, I said softly. I know. He crossed himself, but there was no prayer after it, just a small silence, heavy as guilt. Then he whispered, "She was my sister." For a moment, all I could hear was the rain. It hit the roof, the windows, the floor. It hit everything that could be hit, but not him. He sat still, hands folded, eyes closed like a man praying to something that had already stopped listening. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "She wasn't crazy," he said. "They said she was, but she wasn't. She saw too much, and that's something this city doesn't forgive." I thought of the drive inside the Bible, the hidden pages, the verse about hell. I thought about the smell of citrus and the men in clean coats. All of it lined up in my mind like dominoes, waiting for one breath to push them over. "What are you going to do with it?" I asked. The priest hesitated. Then he said, "If I destroy it, they keep winning. If I give it to the police, it disappears. I don't know what's left to do. Maybe you'll give it to someone who can't be bought." He smiled, bitter. "You know anyone like that?" I looked down at my hands, cracked and stained with smoke. "I used to." He nodded, as if that was the only answer worth hearing. Then he reached for the Bible, opened it, and touched the flash drive like it might burn him. When he looked up again, his eyes were full of something like resolve or suicide. Sometimes they look the same. "If anything happens to me," he said, "tell them my name was Father Adrian. Tell them Mara wasn't lying." He stood, tucked the drive into his sleeve, and walked out into the rain. I sat there long after we'd gone. The candles flickered, the air smelled of wax and wet dust, and I could still feel the heat of the fire from the bridge clinging to my coat. When I finally stepped outside, the street was empty, except for a black car parked across from the church. Its engine was off, but the windows were fogged from inside. I didn't need to see faces to know what that meant. The city doesn't waste time collecting its debts. I started walking toward the bridge, keeping my head low. The rain followed me like a witness, too afraid to testify. By the time I reached my fire again, the Bible was gone. Only the bench remained. The bridge was quieter than usual. No traffic above, no pigeons, no bottle rolling in the wind. Only the river, swollen from the rain, dragging pieces of the city downstream. Wrappers, bottles, someone's lost shoe, maybe someone's last hope. I stood there, staring at the place where the Bible had been, the way a man looks at an empty chair after a funeral. The fire had gone out hours ago, leaving only a ring of wet charcoal. I kicked through it, more from habit than anger, and something small and black glinted beneath the ash. It wasn't the Bible. It was the flash drive. I picked it up carefully, wiped it on my sleeve, and felt a pulse of warmth still in the metal. That meant someone had touched it not long ago. Father Adrian. Or maybe someone else who'd come looking for him. I turned the drive over in my hand, then looked toward the water. A police siren wailed somewhere far off, echoing through the fog. It was impossible to tell whether it was moving toward me or away. That's when I saw the light. Not from the bridge, from across the river, where the city's reflection bent and shimmered. A car's headlights flashed twice, then once more, like a signal. 3 short bursts, not random. A pattern. I waited, half hidden by the shadow of the concrete pillar. A figure stepped out from the far side, a woman in a dark coat, holding an umbrella that glimmered under the rain. She looked up at the bridge, then straight toward me, even though I was just a shadow. For a moment, I thought I saw her face. It wasn't Mara, but something in her expression, that same tired mercy, made my chest tighten. She didn't move closer. She just called out, her voice barely carrying over the water. "Father Adrian." The name hung there, unanswered, She looked around once more, as if expecting someone to step from the fog, then turned back to her car. Before she got in, she shouted, "If you have it, don't trust anyone." The door slammed. The taillights flared red, then vanished into the mist. I stood there a long time after that. The river spoke in broken sentences. The city coughed in its sleep. And I thought about the weight of the small thing in my hand, a piece of plastic and metal, holding lives that people would kill to keep quiet. I walked back to my spot under the bridge, sat down, and let the drive rest between my palms. It felt heavier now. Maybe it was the rain, maybe guilt, or maybe it was the truth, trying to decide whether it wanted to be found. The wind shifted, carrying a sound from above, tires screeching, doors slamming, voices. I slid the drive into the lining of my coat and waited. 2 shadows appeared at the top of the slope, backlit by street lamps, moving fast and deliberate. The same men from before. And behind them someone smaller, the priest. He was on his knees, hands tied, head bowed. Even from here I could see the blood mixing with the rain on his collar. One of the men pushed him forward until he stumbled halfway down the incline. The other aimed a gun. No words, no hesitation. The shot cracked through the night. Father Adrian fell hard, rolled twice, and came to rest a few feet from my fire pit. They left him there. The car's engine roared away before the echo had even died. I crawled toward him, the mud sucking at my knees. His eyes were open, his lips moving, but no sound came out. Then finally a whisper. She was right, all of it. His fingers twitched, searching for something, and I took his hand. He tried to speak again, but his throat gave only air. Then, with what was left of his strength, he pressed something into my palm, a small cross, wood worn smooth from years of faith. He exhaled once, slow, then nothing. I sat with him until the rain slowed to a drizzle. There are no sirens for people like us. Not the homeless, not the damned, not the inconvenient. The city doesn't cry for its forgotten. It just hides them better. When I finally moved, the sky had begun to pale. I dug a shallow hole near the edge of the river and buried him there, beneath the old graffiti that read, "God sees." It felt like a lie, but maybe a necessary one. I placed the wooden cross at the top and said nothing. Sometimes words only make the silence louder. Then I pulled the flash drive from my coat and looked at it one last time. It seemed too small to hold so much pain, too ordinary to carry something people would kill for. I walked to the water's edge and watched the current churn below. It would have been easy. One flick of the wrist and it would disappear forever. No evidence, no truth, no reason for anyone else to die. But then I remembered Mara's voice. The way she said, "Tell him I wasn't angry anymore." And I thought about the priest, bleeding in the rain, saying she was right. If truth dies, the dead don't rest. They haunt the living until someone finally listens. So I didn't throw it in. Instead, I wrapped it in the last piece of cloth from my coat and tucked it deep into the hollow space between the bridge's supports, a place only the rats and the wind ever find. Maybe someday someone braver will come looking, someone who still believes that the truth matters. The city began to wake again. Engines, sirens, footsteps. The light grew harsh. I sat by the water, shivering, listening to the hum of life returning to a world that didn't know it had lost something. After a while I spoke, not to anyone, but to the river, to the ghosts, to whatever still lingers in the spaces between the sounds. "You wanted heaven," I said softly, "but you built it out of hell." The words drifted away, swallowed by the morning. I stood, wiped the mud from my hands, and looked once more at the small wooden cross by the water. Then I whispered the only thing that ever makes sense anymore. My name is Walter Gray, and I'm the voice on the sidewalk. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and fire. The river kept moving, and the city, as always, pretended not to hear.